Good old JavaScript. JavaScript has been around for a very long time. It was invented by Brendan Eich and first introduced into HTML in 1995. So what is JavaScript used for? What can it do? Well, JavaScript is a very strange kind of programming language, and many developers learn it and use it without fully understanding the advantages and disadvantages of the capabilities of JavaScript. So let me break this lesson down into 3 parts. 1, I'll explain how JavaScript interacts with a web page. 2, I will explain what JavaScript should and should not be used to accomplish, and why. And number 3, I'll show you a very easy example of how JavaScript is commonly used, even though it's not a very good idea to use it that way. Now, you should note that there is another programming language called Java, and it has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with JavaScript. So, don't get the two confused. Java and JavaScript are not the same thing, just like lightning and lightning bugs are not the same. So how does JavaScript interact with a web page? In order to explain how and why JavaScript is useful and when it is not useful, it's important to grasp how it interacts with the code of a web page. While technology like HTML and CSS interact with the visible page and the visible code, JavaScript interacts with a sort of backstage area of a web browser. This area is called the DOM, which is an abbreviation for the Document Object Model. Now, as usual, the computer nerds are trying to confuse us with haughty-sounding terminology, but it's a very simple concept. The DOM isn't a tangible part of the web page. It's not a kind of code or a new command or a different language. The DOM is simply the computer nerd term for the way a browser interprets what to do with the HTML code. So, let me give an example using something very simple. Imagine we have a bold tag on a web page. Okay, we already know what a bold tag looks like and what it does. The web page is the document. The bold tag is the object. The browser, knowing I need to make this bold, is part of the way the browser will model that object. Does that make more sense? So the web page is a document. All the HTML elements on that page are the objects, and the internal processing of how to display those objects is the model. Okay? Does that make sense now? Another good analogy is a television set, right? We all know how a television works. A signal gets sent to the television via the air or cable. The internal electronics interpret that signal and process it into a picture on the screen. So think of your browser like a television set. The signal being sent to your browser is the code of the web page. There's an internal processing component of your browser which interprets that code, then shows it in your browser window. So the DOM of a television would be the internal circuitry. The HTML and CSS of a television would be the image that appears on the screen. So the internal processing in a browser, which understands how to render the HTML, is the DOM of the browser. JavaScript can actually manipulate the DOM. In other words, JavaScript can change things on a web page without changing the HTML. How? Because the JavaScript is changing the way the browser will model the objects in the document. Ah, now it makes sense. It's pretty wild, huh? So this is incredibly powerful and cool, but as you can imagine, with great power comes great responsibility. Too many developers are abusing this power and they don't fully understand why it's a really bad idea to use JavaScript poorly. Sloppily manipulating the DOM is not a good thing, and JavaScript is often a misused technology. Developers frequently use JavaScript to implement features which can more logically be done using other technologies, such as CSS or PHP. What JavaScript should not be used for, but often is changing or displaying the main body content of a page. What JavaScript should be used for is powering interactive elements of a web page. So let me give you examples of both. What JavaScript is frequently used for, but never should be, things like altering fonts. You should use CSS instead. Posting information from a database. You should use XML or PHP. Displaying the date on a page. You should use PHP instead. Writing data to the page from another file, such as plain text or a JSON file. Use XML instead. Now, what JavaScript should be used for is things like building a calculator. For example, an order form which totals all of your costs. Creating an interactive map, like the markers used in a Google Maps API. Changing dynamic image links, such as the watch video image on the Girls and Grandpas web pages. Tracking special parameters and links. That was something we did at Disney to track the popularity of what people were clicking on. JavaScript should never, or very rarely, be used for passive content displayed on the page, only for interactive content. So, what is the difference? And why do I make these suggestions? I mean, if JavaScript is capable of doing so much, why not use it for everything? Well, that's a valid question. In short, anything which renders to the page using JavaScript has at least 3 big problems. Number 1, since content is changed in the DOM and not seen in the code, it will not be indexed by search engine spiders, so nothing you built in JavaScript will help with SEO. In fact, it could probably harm your SEO rankings. Number 2, since your data is in a separate file from the HTML page, for example, if you're parsing information from a JSON file, if the user wants to save that web page for later reference, they're unable to do so. Number 3, because you're dynamically changing the page content, it breaks the back button in the browser. So for example, a user may click on a link and be presented with an entirely new page of data. But when they click the back button in their browser, with the intent of returning to the previous page, they get sent to the previous website they'd visited, because the new page they were given was simply the same page with new data. All of those caveats make for a terrible user experience, and you never want to build sites that are a terrible user experience. Now I realize I just mentioned JSON twice, and I've not explained what a JSON file means. I haven't explained XML or a PHP. Don't worry, it's not important for now. In future videos, I will explain JSON, XML, and PHP. And I will elaborate more on the pitfalls of JavaScript. But for now, let's just focus on the proper and sensible way to use JavaScript, and we'll address the poorly implemented uses later. So, having just derided using JavaScript to write content to a page, there can occasionally be a reason to use JavaScript in that manner. For example, if you've not learned a language like PHP, or your web host only supports plain old HTML, not that I've ever seen a web host like that, but I'm just giving examples, you might want to write certain information with JavaScript, even though you might sacrifice some of your SEO rankings. So how do we start using JavaScript to write data on an HTML page? JavaScript is a lot like CSS in that it can be applied into an HTML document in the same ways: inline, embedded, or linked. So we're going to start with some super easy JavaScript examples. And remember, within the depth and breadth of JavaScript, there are literally thousands of things JavaScript is capable of doing. JavaScript gives you a lot of Legos to play with. We're just scratching the surface here. But if I teach you basic syntax, you see how it's placed on the page, it'll make it far easier to understand implementing things when you research more complicated stuff on your own. First, we'll talk about the ways that you shouldn't really be using JavaScript, but that's the way that everybody seems to be doing it. So here's a few examples. You can write JavaScript to the page in a way where it's embedded. You can import it from a function in an include file, or you could just use a variable, and you could also use a function that breaks it up into different lines. So let's take a look at the source code for this. Now, as you can see, the very first line says script, right? There's an open and close script tag, so that indicates that you're going to be using JavaScript. And then inside, it's document.write, and then this is the line that is written by JavaScript. So that's that text right there. So that's one of the simplest ways to do it. Then you can also call JavaScript from an external file, just like you can with CSS, with style sheets. So here we have an include JavaScript example, and the JavaScripts are indicated by .js files. And right here is that file. So we have all these different ways that we're calling JavaScript inside that file. So first we call it right here, and then right here is a function. So we're calling script, and then we're just calling the name of the function, which is a variable. So it says writer thingy is here, and if we come up here, we say function writer thingy is here, document.write. So the function is calling a document.write function, just like it was right up here when we just embedded the JavaScript on the page. Okay, so then we can also use a variable. So right here we can say document.write and then the line of text to use, and then we come back in here, we see var for variable and the line of text to use equals, and here's the text that's getting written. Okay, and then finally gets a little bit more complicated with this last one. We say building a table with JavaScript. So we come back in here and we can see the function is doing a document.write, but it's just writing out all the code for a table. So we already know how to do that because we've seen tables in basic HTML. And yeah, this is it. This is basically a lot of the ways that JavaScript is being used, just writing content to a page. Like I said, this really isn't the best use of JavaScript, but it is pretty common. A more proper use of JavaScript is this example right here, the mouse overs. So as I have said, any kind of interaction that you're going to have with a web page is an appropriate use for JavaScript. So let's say if we have coming soon on our video, and then as we mouse over it, it changes to watch video. Now let's look at the source code for this, and we can see it's pretty simple. So basically we have a div with an inline style, and there's a background image of the coming soon JPEG. Okay, then we can see here this is just a plain old href, which we have used before, which is wrapped around this image, which is a little transparent 1x1 GIF file. So we're telling that GIF file that it should be this certain size right here using another inline style. We want it 320 pixels wide, 180 pixels high. Okay, so imagine this that it's kind of like in layers. All right, so we have the coming soon image, and then on top of that is this transparent GIF that's just kind of sitting there. Okay, so that's what we're looking at when we're looking at the page right here. We're actually looking at two images. We're looking at coming soon, and then we're looking at a transparent image that's superimposed over the top. All right, so the href, as you can see, it's pretty normal right there. It's calling a URL, and it has a target of blank, so we know what all that stuff is. But you'll notice here on mouse over and on mouse out, it gets a little bit different. And you'll also notice here in the image, there's another element that we haven't seen before, which is name. So this element is a variable. Obviously, horse poopy is not a command that is ordinarily used in any kind of HTML, but I like giving really weird, goofy names to variables as I'm instructing people, because then the variable really stands out, right? Like, you know that, okay, that's not something that's a part of normal HTML. That's something that you made up on your own. So we look at mouse over, and it says document.horsepoopy.source equals play button, PNG. Okay, that's on mouse over. And then on mouse out, it's document.horsepoopy source equals that 1x1 GIF image. Okay, so you can kind of work it out just by looking at this. Once you kind of break it down like that, it sort of becomes easy. So you're going, oh, okay, so as a part of the document that is named horse poopy, we're on the mouse over going to have a source image that is this. And then on the mouse out, we're going to have a source image that is this. So which element of the page is, I see right here. That's it. Horse poopy. This image, this 1x1 GIF, is named horse poopy. So when we mouse over it, it's going to change to play button. There we go. And then when we mouse out, it changes to a 1x1 GIF. There we go. See? So it's confusing when you're new to this, but once you start to break it down and understand exactly what's happening, it makes a lot of sense. It's not that hard. It's not that confusing, because the code is telling you exactly what it's doing. On the mouse over, it's calling this document horse poopy play button. And when the mouse comes out of the image, it's switching back to what the image originally was. Okay, guys, so for this next example, I completely screwed up. I made a really big mistake. See, I didn't record everything for these videos in chronological order. So what happened was I built this calculator which uses an HTML form, and I forgot that in this lesson, in lesson 13, I have not taught forms yet, because I created this video after I had done the lesson where I do teach you about forms, which, to be precise, is part 15. It is article 15 of the Girls and Grandpas articles. So you might want to skip this and come back to it after you have seen part 15. I'm really sorry about that. It's the one mistake that I've made in this series of 20-something videos. But what can I say? I just messed up the chronology of things and got confused, and I didn't realize that, oh wait, no, at this point I haven't actually taught you about forms yet. So if you want to check it out and see maybe if you can follow along, but I do recommend that you probably come back to this after you see part 15. Finally, we're going to finish off with a web page that utilizes JavaScript in the way that it should be used, and that is for interactive information. So here, the example we're going to show you is an online bakery. Okay, so here we have an order form if you want to buy stuff from the bakery. And we've gone over order forms before, so a lot of this should be familiar. And as you can see, you can order different pies. The bigger the pie, the more it costs. You can also select a filling, add candles and balloons, and they all have a price associated, and down here is the total price. So let's watch what happens in the total price field as we change our selections. So let's say we just want a little 6-inch pie. There we go, it's 20 bucks. That shows up in our total. Then we want to add some candles, so it should pop up to 25, right? And there we go, it's 25. Let's add some balloons as well, right? Now it's 45. And then we could select a pie filling. I'll put in some raspberry. There we go, $55. Now let's say, you know what? Never mind. Let's make it a little bigger. Let's get a 10-inch pie instead. There we go. $70. But you know what? We don't need the balloons. Let's get rid of the balloons. So it should drop down to 50. And there we go. Drops to 50. So this is really cool. And this is what JavaScript should be used for. You should not use JavaScript to simply display information, like, let's say, search results, right? That should not be done with JavaScript. But if you're going to have interactive information like this, that's perfect for JavaScript. This is something that JavaScript is really good at. So let's take a look at the code and see how all this is done. So right here is all the HTML. A lot of it is very familiar. You can see right here we're referencing our JavaScript file. And then down here we've got the radio buttons for the form. And all that's pretty familiar, right? There's a type, there's the name, there's a value. And then down here, this is new. We haven't shown you drop-down boxes before, but it's pretty simple, right? You can see there's a select element that opens and closes around option elements. So that's, pretty easy stuff. But you'll notice that just about everything in the form, just about every single element has this on click, right? Calculate total. And down here, there's an on click, calculate total. For the drop downs, it's a little different. It's on change instead of on click, but it's still calling that same JavaScript function, right? So what's that all about? Well, first, let me tell you what this one's about. This is just so that the submit button doesn't actually work, right? So because we're just using this to demonstrate the price changes, we don't want the submit button to take us anywhere. So that's the only reason that's in there. So you can kind of ignore that. But all the other stuff's important, right? What is this calculate total thing doing? Well, let's go take a look at the JavaScript and see. So this page of the JavaScript is going to look pretty complicated. It's pretty confusing, but there's a ton of comments that will help you out. So first we got this block of code right here. This is an array of all the prices of the pies. And as you can see, the numbers correspond. We got $20, $25, $35, and if we come back here, we look at the pies, there we go. There's our prices, right? 20, 25, 35. So the JavaScript doesn't know anything about these numbers and what's happening in the HTML, right? The JavaScript doesn't see this stuff, doesn't understand any of this. The JavaScript is going off of this. So we're associating like round 6, right, with the value here, round 6, which happens to be $20. So that's how the JavaScript knows that it's $20, okay? And same thing here, we got the filling prices, same thing, there's numbers associated with it, all right? Then our next big chunk of code right here is to get the pie size price. So here we're associating the JavaScript with the form. Here we're associating it with the pie. And then here is where we loop through all of the potential radio buttons here, right? And we figure out the pricing. And then similarly to that, right here we got a block of code for the filling prices. And we got to do the same thing. We have to identify the form, then we have to identify the filling, and then we're just getting the values on all of these various filling prices, okay? And then candles, exact same idea, right? Identify the form, identify that piece of the form, and the candles are $5, right? So all of these sections, all these blocks, you can see all these different functions. Function balloon price, function candles price, function filling price. I guess I need a comment down here on this one. I forgot to put that in there. But then, here we go. Most important part, calculating the total down at the bottom. So we can see we're setting a variable, and we're getting all of these, all the returns here at the end of all of these functions. You can see there's that return, and there's that return. So we're taking all those and adding them all together in order to get the order price. And then there is the order price, which is identified by the total price element, which if we come back to here, there we go. There's the ID of that text input field, right? So that matches up to that element ID. So that's why the order price of the total of everything shows up in that total price field right there. See? So, like I said, it's a little complicated, a little intimidating if you're not used to it. But with all the comments, and if you kind of look at everything as these single blocks of code, it gets a little easier to understand. You could play around with the code, remove some of these things, maybe just, take out all that stuff right there. Maybe just give yourself 3 pie prices and toy around with that and see what you can come up with. So this should give you a pretty good idea, like I said, of the proper way, the right way to use JavaScript. Use it for interactive information, not to simply display information. I hope that makes sense. You know what you just accomplished? You learned a 4th programming language and you didn't even know it. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about DHTML, which is an abbreviation for dynamic HTML. You'll sometimes see computer nerds throw around the term DHTML as if it's a unique language or something special. No, nope. Once again, that's just computer nerds trying to make you think they're smart. DHTML is nothing but HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all being used together. If you build a page with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you're using DHTML. I know. It's stupid, but computer nerds like to make things confusing and complicated. Once upon a time, JavaScript was pretty lame. It was really complicated, it couldn't do very much, and it broke most browsers. Using JavaScript was a pointless waste of time. Of course, the computer nerds loved it. Over the years, that's changed significantly. JavaScript eventually became awesome. Suddenly, it was worthwhile to learn. JavaScript has transformed into a very compelling technology for adding technology and functionality to HTML. It's way more powerful than CSS, although regrettably, JavaScript is often used foolishly. For example, I once saw a developer use an entire line of intricate JavaScript code to open a new link in a browser window with a function attainable using 2 words, target equals blank, right, in plain old HTML. It's a perfect example of a computer nerd adding complicated technology for no good reason. Don't do that. So, now that you understand why you should never use something like JavaScript to write text to a web page, is there ever a time that you should? Why would you want to use JavaScript to write text to your page? What possible advantage is there? Well, on a single page, there isn't any advantage at all. But suppose you're running a small business and you build a website with 20 pages, and suppose you actually want customers to contact you, so you wisely place your address and phone number on the footer of every page. And what if your phone number changes? If your phone number is hard-coded onto every individual page, you have to change your number on all 20 pages. But if your phone number was being written dynamically out of a JavaScript variable, see where I'm going with this? You put your address in a JavaScript variable and you only need to change your phone number in one place. And it will automatically change on all 20 pages of your site. Now that is a cool, practical, and powerful use of some simple JavaScript. But wait, there's more. You get the code, you get the example, but that's not all. Like a Ginsu knife, it slices, it dices, and JavaScript can do a whole lot more. Write code to your page, write clocks, build a calculator, open pop-up windows, parse query strings. You have no idea what that means, but trust me, it's pretty neat. One fellow even built an exact replica of the entire Lemmings video game purely in JavaScript. Go look it up, check it out, it's pretty amazing. So, these document.write examples are just the beginning, but they're a really good start to illustrate an actual practical use for JavaScript right off the bat. Used properly, JavaScript might even be able to saw through an aluminum Coke can and still slice a tomato with ease. All this can be yours for 3 low monthly payments of $19.95. Call now. Operators are standing by. And remember, kids, the world owes you nothing until you create things of value.